Lagos bustled with the usual chaos that came with the early morning rush. Adaora Nwankwo weaved through the traffic with practiced ease, her old Toyota Camry dodging potholes on the road. She had always hated Lagos, with its noise, the incessant hustle, and the unbearable heat. But what choice did she have? After graduating from a prestigious university in the UK, she had returned home, only to find that jobs were scarce, and opportunities were even scarcer. Her once bright dreams of making a name for herself had dimmed into a daily grind of job hunting and freelancing to make ends meet. Today was different though. She had an interview lined up at one of the biggest tech companies in Lagos, and for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Dressed in a modest yet professional outfit, she was determined to impress. But as fate would have it, her plans were about to take a sharp turn. At that very moment, on the other side of Lagos, Chinedu Okafor was sealing a multi-million-dollar deal in his high-rise office. He was a man of power and precision, every move calculated, every word measured. But behind the cool, composed exterior was a man with a deep-seated desire for control over his empire, his family, and soon, over the woman who would become his wife. Chinedu's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was his fiancée, Ebere. He frowned slightly as he answered. Ebere, I'm in a meeting. This better be important. Her voice was shaky, uncertain. Chinedu, we need to talk. I can't go through with the wedding. For a moment, Chinedu was silent. Then, his voice turned cold. What do you mean, you can't go through with it? The wedding is in 2 days. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I can't marry you. I've already left Lagos. Before he could respond, the line went dead. Chinedu clenched his jaw, his hand tightening around the phone. This was a problem he hadn't anticipated, and he hated surprises. He needed a solution, and fast. Adaora's interview didn't go as planned. The company had filled the position before she even arrived, leaving her once again facing the harsh reality of unemployment. Frustrated and dejected, she made her way home, only to find her mother waiting for her with a grim expression. There's a man here to see you, Adaora, her mother said quietly. Confused, Adaora entered the living room, only to freeze when she saw who was sitting there. Chinedu Okafor, the billionaire, her sister's fiancé. The man who had turned her world upside down in a matter of seconds. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Your sister is gone, Adaora. She won't be coming back. Adora's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Chinedu leaned forward, his gaze intense. I need a wife, and it looks like you're going to have to take her place. Adaora stared at Chinedu in disbelief. The words he had just spoken echoed in her mind. I need a wife, and it looks like you're going to have to take her place. No, she finally said, shaking her head as if that would somehow dispel the madness of the situation. You can't be serious. I'm not Ebere. I can't just replace her. Chinedu's eyes narrowed, his patience clearly wearing thin. This isn't a request, Adaora. Your family is deeply in debt, and I've been more than generous with your sister, allowing her to live a life of comfort. Now, it's time to repay that debt. Debt. Adaora frowned, her thoughts racing. What are you talking about? Your father's debt, Chinedu replied coldly. The ones that have been piling up for years. Your family owes me millions, and I am not in the habit of letting such matters slide. Your sister's marriage to me was supposed to settle that debt. Now that she's gone, you will take her place. Adora's heart pounded in her chest. She had known about the financial difficulties her family was facing, but she had no idea it was this severe. Still, the idea of marrying this man, this cold, calculating billionaire, was unthinkable. I won't do it, she said firmly, standing her ground. You can't force me into this. Chinedu's expression didn't change. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest as if he had all the time in the world. You don't have a choice, Adaora. Either you marry me, or your family loses everything, their home, their business, everything. The weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She knew he wasn't bluffing. Chinedu Okafor was not a man to make idle threats. But how could she marry him? How could she bind herself to a man she barely knew, a man who saw marriage as nothing more than a business transaction? Seeing the conflict in her eyes, Chinedu softened his tone, though his words remained just as unyielding. I'm not asking for love, Adaora. This is a marriage of convenience. You fulfill your family's obligations, and in return, you will want for nothing. You'll have all the wealth, status, and security that comes with being my wife. It's a simple deal. A deal, Adaora repeated, her voice thick with disbelief. Marriage isn't a deal, Chinedu. It's supposed to mean something. In my world, Adaora, everything is a deal, he replied, his eyes locking with hers. Now, what will it be? Do you walk away and let your family suffer, or do you step up and do what's necessary? Adaora felt trapped, cornered by circumstances beyond her control. She glanced at her mother, who had been silently watching the exchange, her eyes filled with worry and fear. In that moment, Adaora realized that she couldn't let her family lose everything. No matter how much she hated the idea of marrying Chinedu, she couldn't bear the thought of her mother and siblings being left destitute. With a deep breath, she finally spoke. Fine, I'll marry you. Chinedu gave a satisfied nod, as if her agreement had been a foregone conclusion. Good, we'll make the necessary arrangements. The wedding will proceed as planned, only now, you'll be the bride. The next few days passed in a blur for Adaora. She found herself swept up in a whirlwind of preparations, with little time to process what was happening. The wedding, which had been meticulously planned for months, would go on with only one significant change: she would be the one walking down the aisle instead of Ebere. The ceremony was set to take place at one of Lagos' most luxurious hotels, an extravagant affair that showcased Chinedu's wealth and status. The guest list included high-profile politicians, business moguls, and celebrities, people Adaora had only ever seen on TV or in magazines. As she stood in front of the mirror on the day of the wedding, dressed in the elaborate white gown that had been custom-made for Ebere, Adaora felt like she was living someone else's life. The woman staring back at her, with perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, and a dress that shimmered with every movement, didn't feel like her at all. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, and her mother stepped into the room. She looked at Adaora with a mixture of pride and sorrow. You look beautiful, my dear, she said softly. Mom, Adaora whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can do this. Her mother approached her, taking her hands in her own. I know this isn't what you wanted, Adaora. But sometimes in life, we have to make sacrifices for the ones we love. You're doing this for the family, and I'm so proud of you. Adaora nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. She wished there was another way, a way to escape the fate that had been thrust upon her. But deep down, she knew her mother was right. She had made her choice, and now she had to see it through. When the time came, Adaora walked down the aisle with a sense of detachment, her steps measured and steady despite the turmoil inside her. Chinedu stood at the altar, his expression unreadable as he watched her approach. He looked every bit the powerful, confident man she had come to know, a man who was always in control, even on his wedding day. The ceremony itself was a blur of vows and rituals, words spoken without meaning as Adaora went through the motions. She barely registered the moment when Chinedu slipped the ring onto her finger, binding them together in a union that was more contract than marriage. When it was over, and they were officially pronounced husband and wife, Chinedu leaned in to kiss her. The brief contact of his lips against hers felt strangely formal, a gesture of obligation rather than affection. And just like that, Adaora Nwankwo became Mrs. Chinedu Okafor. But as she looked into his eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous game. From this point forward, the story would delve deeper into the complexities of Adaora and Chinedu's relationship. As they navigate their marriage, Adaora would gradually uncover the secrets that Chinedu has kept hidden, including his ruthless business dealings and the true reason why her sister fled. Meanwhile, Adaora would have to fend off the advances and schemes of Chinedu's rivals, especially his cousin Obinna, who sees Adaora as a weak point to exploit. Tension would continue to build as Adaora and Chinedu are forced to rely on each other, even as they struggle with their conflicting emotions. Adora's initial resentment and fear would slowly give way to a reluctant attraction, though she would constantly question whether she could ever truly trust Chinedu. Throughout the story, cultural elements from the Igbo community would be woven in, from traditional customs to family dynamics, adding layers of authenticity and depth to the narrative. The reception was in full swing, a grand affair that radiated opulence. Guests mingled in the lavishly decorated hall, toasting the newlyweds and indulging in the finest food and drinks. Adaora moved through the crowd like a ghost, smiling politely at the well-wishers, but her mind was elsewhere. The reality of her situation was sinking in, and with it came a growing sense of dread. As she stood by the grand staircase, her gaze drifted to Chinedu, who was deep in conversation with several prominent business associates. He seemed perfectly at ease, as if this was just another deal in his empire. His ability to remain composed under any circumstance both fascinated and unnerved her. Adaora, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see her younger brother, Chima, approaching. His expression was a mixture of concern and admiration. "You look amazing," he said, but his tone was subdued. "Are you okay?" Adaora forced a smile. "I'm fine, Chima. It's just a lot to take in." "I know this isn't what you wanted," Chima said, lowering his voice. "But you're doing the right thing for the family. I hope he treats you well." Adaora glanced at Chinedu, who was now shaking hands with a powerful politician. "I hope so too," she whispered. Chima sighed and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "If you need anything, just let me know. I'm here for you, Adaora." She nodded, grateful for his support. But as she watched her brother walk away, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her new reality pressing down on her. She was no longer just Adaora Nwankwo. She was now Mrs. Chinedu Okafor, wife to one of the most powerful men in Nigeria, a man she barely knew, and a man she had no choice but to trust. The reception eventually wound down, and Adaora found herself being escorted to the penthouse suite of the hotel, where she and Chinedu would spend their first night as husband and wife. The luxury of the suite did little to ease her nerves as she stood in the center of the room, staring out at the glittering lights of Lagos through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She heard the door close behind her and turned to see Chinedu entering the room. He loosened his tie and approached her with that same calm, composed demeanor that never seemed to waver. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, his voice low and even. No one suspected anything was amiss. Adaora managed a small nod. "Thank you." There was a moment of silence between them, filled with an unspoken tension. Chinedu studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "I know this isn't how you imagined your life turning out, Adaora. But I need you to understand something. This marriage is real. You may not have chosen it, but we are bound by it now. And I expect you to fulfill your role as my wife." Adaora's heart skipped a beat. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means that you will be by my side in public, that you will uphold the image of the perfect wife," Chinedu said, his tone firm. "In return, I will provide for you and your family. But I also expect loyalty, discretion, and obedience." "Obedience," Adaora repeated, bristling at the word. Chinedu's eyes darkened slightly. "I'm not a tyrant, Adaora. But I am a man who values control. I won't tolerate betrayal or defiance. As long as you understand that, we'll get along just fine." Adaora felt a surge of defiance rising within her, but she quickly swallowed it down. This was not the time to challenge him, not yet. Instead, she nodded. "I understand." Chinedu seemed satisfied with her response. He took a step closer, reaching out to gently lift her chin so that she was forced to meet his gaze. "Good. Now, let's get one thing straight. This is our first night together, but I won't force anything on you. We'll take things at your pace. But remember, Adaora, you are my wife now. That means eventually, we will have to consummate this marriage." His words sent a shiver down her spine, but she forced herself to remain composed. "I appreciate that," she said quietly. Chinedu released her chin and took a step back. "You can have the bed. I'll sleep on the couch tonight." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Adaora standing alone in the center of the room. She watched as he settled himself on the plush couch, pulling off his shoes and reclining back with a sigh of exhaustion. He didn't say another word as he closed his eyes, as if the conversation they had just had was already forgotten. Adaora hesitated for a moment before retreating to the bedroom. As she changed out of her wedding gown and into the silk nightdress that had been laid out for her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. This was only the beginning, and she had no idea what the future held for her in this marriage. As she lay in the massive bed, staring up at the ceiling, Adaora realized that her life had taken a turn she could never have predicted. She was now tied to a man of immense power and influence, and navigating this marriage would require all the strength and cunning she possessed. The following weeks were a whirlwind of adjustments. Adaora moved into Chinedu's sprawling mansion in Ikoyi, a place so vast and luxurious that it felt more like a palace than a home. The staff was efficient and discreet, always addressing her as "Madam" and catering to her every need. But despite the opulence surrounding her, Adaora couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. Chinedu was often away on business, leaving her to navigate her new life alone. When he was home, their interactions were polite but distant, as if they were merely cohabiting rather than living as husband and wife. Adaora found herself longing for some form of connection, but Chinedu remained an enigma, his emotions carefully guarded. One evening, after another silent dinner, Chinedu surprised her by inviting her to accompany him to a charity gala. "You should be seen by my side," he said simply. "People will talk if you keep hiding away." Adaora hesitated but ultimately agreed. The gala was a high-profile event, attended by Lagos elite, and she knew it was important for her to present herself as the perfect wife. She spent the day preparing, choosing a sleek, elegant gown that complemented her figure and had her hair styled to perfection. When they arrived at the event, Adaora was struck by the sheer opulence of the affair. The room was filled with chandeliers, velvet drapes, and an air of wealth and sophistication. Chinedu, as always, looked impeccably composed, effortlessly commanding attention as they entered. As they mingled with the other guests, Adaora found herself constantly under scrutiny. People whispered behind her back, assessing the new Mrs. Okafor with thinly veiled curiosity. She forced herself to smile and engage in small talk, even as she felt like an outsider in this world of privilege and power. At one point, Chinedu introduced her to a tall, attractive man with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze. "Adaora, this is Obinna Okeke, my cousin." Obinna smiled, though there was something unsettling in his eyes. "So, you're the woman who finally tamed Chinedu. I must say, you're more beautiful than I expected." Adaora's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is all mine," Obinna replied smoothly. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. After all, we're family now." The words were innocent enough, but the way he said them sent a chill down Adaora's spine. She could sense the underlying tension between the two men, and she instinctively knew that Obinna was not to be trusted. As the night wore on, Adaora found herself more and more aware of the power dynamics at play. This world was one of alliances, betrayals, and secrets, and she realized that if she was going to survive, she would have to learn how to navigate it. When they finally returned home that night, Adaora couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in on her, and for the first time, she truly understood the danger of the life she had entered. As she prepared for bed, she caught a glimpse of Chinedu standing by the window, staring out into the night. There was a heaviness in his posture that she hadn't noticed before, a weariness that spoke of burdens she couldn't begin to understand. "Chinedu," she said softly, approaching him. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What is it, Adaora?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing. I just wanted to say good night." Chinedu studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good night, Adaora." She left him there, standing alone by the window, and as she slipped into bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to be irrevocably changed, and not for the better. The next morning, Adaora awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside the expansive windows of her bedroom. For a brief moment, she felt a sense of peace, but it quickly faded as the reality of her situation settled back in. The mansion, though grand, felt like a gilded cage, and she couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something dark lingered beneath its luxurious surface. Chinedu had already left for a business meeting by the time she made her way downstairs. The staff greeted her with their usual polite smiles, but there was an undercurrent of tension in the air that she couldn't quite place. She wandered through the mansion, trying to distract herself with the art, the architecture, and the stunning views of Lagos, but nothing could shake the unease that had taken root in her heart. As she entered the library, she noticed a stack of papers on Chinedu's desk. Curiosity got the better of her, and she approached cautiously. She knew she shouldn't be snooping, but the more she tried to ignore the strange dynamics in her new life, the more she felt compelled to uncover the truth. One document, in particular, caught her eye, a contract with the Okeke family name on it. Her mind immediately flashed back to Obinna, Chinedu's cousin. She hadn't been able to forget the unsettling way he had spoken to her at the gala. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that Obinna had ulterior motives, and that whatever was going on between him and Chinedu was far from ordinary family rivalry. Before she could delve deeper into the papers, a voice behind her made her jump. "Madam, can I get you anything?" Adaora turned to see the housekeeper, Nkechi, standing in the doorway. She quickly composed herself, offering a smile. "No, thank you, Nkechi. I'm just getting to know the house." Nkechi nodded, her expression unreadable. "If you need anything, I'll be in the kitchen." As Nkechi left, Adaora felt a pang of guilt for her curiosity. She knew she couldn't continue living like this, constantly second-guessing everything and everyone around her. She needed answers, but more importantly, she needed to find a way to regain control over her life. That evening, Chinedu returned home, looking exhausted. Adaora watched him as he removed his jacket and loosened his tie, his shoulders slumping with the weight of the day. She knew this wasn't the right time, but she couldn't hold back any longer. "Chinedu," she began, her voice hesitant, "I need to talk to you." He looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What is it?" Adaora hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I want to know more about what's going on with you and Obinna. At the gala, I could feel the tension between you two. And today, I saw some papers in the library, something about a deal with the Okeke family. I need to know what I'm dealing with here." Chinedu's expression hardened, and for a moment, she feared she had overstepped. But instead of snapping at her, he sighed and gestured for her to sit down. "It's complicated, Adaora," he said, his tone weary. "Obinna and we've always had a strained relationship. He resents the fact that I inherited the majority of our family's wealth and businesses. He thinks he deserves more, and he's made it his mission to undermine me at every turn." "Undermine you how?" Adaora asked, her curiosity piqued. Chinedu's jaw tightened. "He's been trying to poach my clients, spread rumors, and sabotage my deals. That contract you saw, it's part of an ongoing negotiation with one of the largest oil companies in Nigeria. If Obinna gets his hands on it, it could ruin everything I've built." Adaora frowned. "But why? Why would he go to such lengths to destroy you?" Chinedu hesitated, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't quite identify. "It's not just about money, Adaora. It's personal. There's history between us, things that go beyond business." Adaora felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of history?" Chinedu met her gaze, his expression guarded. "It's better if you don't know the details. The less you're involved, the safer you'll be." Adaora bristled at his words. "I'm your wife, Chinedu. I deserve to know what's going on, especially if it affects me too." He sighed again, rubbing his temples as if the conversation was physically draining him. "You're right. But you have to understand that this world is dangerous. People like Obinna don't play by the rules. They'll use anything and anyone to get what they want." Adaora nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Then we need to stand together. If we are going to survive this, I need to know everything." Chinedu studied her for a long moment before finally nodding. "All right. But you have to promise me one thing: if things get too dangerous, you'll trust me to protect you. No matter what happens." Adaora nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something far more treacherous than she had anticipated. A few days later, as Adaora was settling into her new routine, the mansion's intercom buzzed. Nkechi's voice crackled through the speaker. "Madam, there's a visitor here to see you. He says it's urgent." Adaora frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. "Who is it?" "Mr. Obinna Okeke," Nkechi replied. Adora's heart skipped a beat. What was Obinna doing here, and why hadn't he called ahead? She took a deep breath and composed herself before heading to the entrance hall. When she arrived, Obinna was already there, casually leaning against the doorframe. His expression was relaxed, but there was a glint in his eyes that made Adaora uneasy. "Obinna," she greeted him, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wasn't expecting you." He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I thought I'd drop by and check on my new cousin-in-law. After all, we didn't get much time to chat at the gala." Adaora forced a polite smile. "I appreciate the visit, but Chinedu isn't home right now. Perhaps you should come back another time." Obinna chuckled. "Oh, I'm not here to see Chinedu. I'm here to see you." Her pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. "What do you want, Obinna?" He stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "I want to make sure you understand the position you're in, Adaora. You may think you're safe in this mansion, with Chinedu by your side, but trust me, nothing is as it seems." "What are you talking about?" Adaora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Obinna's smile widened. "You're smart, Adaora. I'm sure you've noticed things aren't exactly normal around here. My dear cousin has a lot of secrets, and if you're not careful, you'll get caught up in something you can't escape." Adora's heart raced, but she refused to let Obinna see her fear. "If you're trying to scare me, it won't work. I know Chinedu, and I trust him." Obinna laughed softly, shaking his head. "Do you really? Or are you just telling yourself that because you have no other choice?" Before she could respond, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If you ever need help, Adaora, real help, you know where to find me. Don't let loyalty blind you to the truth." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Adaora standing there, shaking and filled with doubt. As she watched him leave, she couldn't help but wonder if Obinna was right. Had she placed her trust in the wrong person? And if so, what would it cost her? That night, Adora's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Obinna's words echoed in her head, sowing seeds of doubt that she couldn't ignore. She had promised Chinedu she would trust him, but how could she do that when so much was hidden from her? Unable to sleep, she got out of bed and made her way to Chinedu's office. If she was going to uncover the truth, she needed to start digging. She rummaged through the documents on his desk, her heart pounding with each page she turned. And then she found it, a file marked confidential. Inside were documents detailing a series of secret transactions, offshore accounts, and dealings with some very dangerous people. But what shocked her the most was the name that appeared repeatedly in the files: Ebere Nwankwo, her sister. Adora's blood ran cold as she stared at the documents. Ebere had been involved in Chinedu's business dealings. How? Why? And what did this mean for her? She sat down heavily in the chair, her mind racing. Everything she thought she knew was unraveling before her eyes. Her sister's disappearance, Chinedu's cryptic warnings, Obinna's insinuations, it all pointed to something much larger and more dangerous than she. Adora's world crumbled around her as she tried to make sense of the revelation. Ebere, her own sister, involved in something so dangerous and intertwined with Chinedu's business. It didn't make sense. She had always known Ebere to be the responsible, cautious one. The sister who had been so protective of Adaora all her life. What could have driven her to this? Her thoughts spiraled, grasping at memories and moments that might offer an explanation. Ebere had always been ambitious, determined to rise above their humble beginnings. But she had never shown any sign of being involved in anything illegal or dangerous. Adaora sat in the dimly lit office, her heart pounding as she stared at the papers before her. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She couldn't wait for Chinedu to come home. She had to confront him, to understand what was really going on. She picked up her phone and dialed Chinedu's number. It rang several times before he answered, his voice gruff and impatient. "Adaora, what is it? I'm in the middle of something." Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Chinedu, we need to talk. Now. I found something about Ebere." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then Chinedu's voice softened, though it was still tense. "Stay where you are. I'll be home soon." He hung up before she could say anything else, leaving Adaora in the oppressive silence of the mansion. She felt a mix of fear and anticipation as she waited, her mind racing with possibilities. What had Ebere gotten herself into? and by how she kept it a secret from Adaora. Thank you
Find
so
out
much
in
for
part
watching,
2.
and please do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoy this story, give it a thumbs up, comment and share. Thank you and God bless you.